I delivered propane to remote areas. Then I met the Korhonens, who were a very bad idea. I used to have a small business delivering propane gas to customers who lived up north, away from civilization. These were a mix of people with cottages, those living off-grid, and what you might call exiles from the daily grind. My deliveries were split between my regulars and those to whom I delivered only once. The Korhonens were the latter. When they called me up one July day, I didn't think anything of it. We set a delivery date a week into August and chatted a bit over the phone. They struck me as a normal couple, childless, in their 50s, expats from Finland. Their only real instruction was that if I couldn't complete the delivery by sundown, I should return in the morning instead. On that August day, I would have easily made it to their place by noon if not for a spot of trouble with my truck that made me double back to town for repairs. By the time the truck was in working order, it was late in the afternoon, but I thought I would risk it anyway. I called en route, but nobody picked up, which isn't particularly strange given the poor cell reception around here, and kept driving, feeling guilty that any potential delay would be my fault because of the truck. The Korhonens lived quite deep in the bush, in an area I wasn't used to delivering to, and the way was longer than it had looked on the map. When I arrived at their property gate, it was already evening, and further darkness seemed to be drifting in on the unseasonably cold breeze. I tried their phone again, no answer, then called out into the wild, no response. I had the code to the gate and could see a building down the gravel driveway, so I opened it and drove through. Nothing caught my eye except for a line of small white stones encircling the homestead, including across the driveway, but my truck had no issue getting over it. The building looked like it was in the midst of repairs, again, not unusual, and had a clearly defined older section, a newer add-on, and an attached metal shed. I parked the truck, got out and knocked on the front door. No one responded. The sun was sinking below the trees by now, but the propane tanks were easily reached and I decided to fill them despite the Korhonen's instructions because I didn't see a good reason to leave, only to come back tomorrow. It was while backing my truck towards the tanks that I heard the first bang. It was followed promptly by another, and a third, fourth, fifth, sixth. Then they ended. I stopped the truck and identified the source of the banging as somewhere inside the house. I knocked on its front door again, harder than before. Again, nobody answered, but this time the door itself swung open. It apparently hadn't been locked. I stepped inside. There was a sterility and a stillness there, the eerie coziness of a morgue after hours. Things were neat. The neatness was unsettling. "Hello," I said to no one in particular. Perhaps it was an animal doing the banging, I thought. That seemed the most reasonable explanation as I scanned the Korhonen's bookshelf, John Muir, Wendell Pentylinkola, and the banging resumed, followed by silence, followed by a voice weakly saying, "Help me." The voice chilled me. I asked, "Who's there?" "Adi Korhonen," the voice said. I still didn't know from where. Their son. They'd told me they didn't have children. "Where are you?" "In the shed." "Help me, please." I found the door to the shed padlocked, but I had bolt cutters in my truck. I told the boy to wait while I ran to get them. Heart beating. Then I came back, cut through the padlock, and found myself face to face with a dirty, emaciated child, pot-bellied, with shadows under his eyes, his hair cut sickly short and skin that looked as pale as clouds. He pleaded with me to take him out of there, to save him. I asked him to follow me, but he said he was too weak to walk, so I picked him up and began carrying him to my truck. All the while my mind was processing the best course of action. I would have called the police, but I didn't have cell reception. When we were a few dozen steps from the truck, Adi Korhonen suddenly cried out, and when I asked what was the matter he begged me to save his sister. "There's a key hidden by the gate. They keep her underground. Please. Let me show you." So instead of putting him in the truck, I turned and carried him up the gravel driveway towards the gate, feeling his tears on my back. But the moment we crossed the boundary of white stones, he pushed away from me, dropped to the ground, and in some combination of the movements of a child and a wild dog ran into the woods. I yelled after him to wait, gazing into the depths defended by the gray trees, but saw nothing but darkness, and when I looked up I realized that night had fallen. After grabbing a flashlight from the glove compartment of my truck, I pressed ahead into the woods where I thought the boy had gone, but I couldn't find him. I'm not sure for how long I tried, or when I gave up, but it was while making my way back to the Corhonen homestead that I came across a clearing, and, in the middle of it, there he was. It was a moonless night. Dark. But for some reason I could see him unnaturally well, as if he himself were emitting light, not a white light but one as the darkness itself, black and shining, penetrating the night world with its A rumbling began somewhere far, far away. And a wind. And as the rumbling grew, the wind intensified and Adi Korhonen shone ever and ever more intensely, his small head becoming a kind of anti-beacon, and in the skies, and between trees, over me began to pass, first only a few, then more, and soon a multitude, of moths in all variations of the darkest colors imaginable, some as small as fingernails, others the size of birds, and I dropped to my knees, then fell onto my chest, and the moths converged, they converged on Adi Korhonen, on his blindingly dark and shining head, covering it, soaking up his infinitely black light, and while they did so and while I lay at the edge of the clearing the most terrible, vile, and violent scenes played in my mind, thefts and betrayals, murders and abuses and tortures, brief but vivid glimpses of such horror deeds. Most of the people involved I did not know, but some I did, some of them I knew. Then they scattered. It was as if Adi Korhonen had grown and exploded into a rain of moths, which disappeared into the depths of the forest in all directions, leaving me in utter and lonely silence on my chest on the cold, damp earth. I eventually got back to the homestead and into my truck. I drove away. The minute I regained cell reception, I called the police to report what had happened. They investigated but found no one in prison there, no signs of wrongdoing and no evidence the Korhonens had ever had a child, named Adi or otherwise. But in the weeks, months and years following the day on which I had met Adi Korhonen, some of the evil things I saw, I can confirm that they've come true. I do not doubt that everything I saw has or will soon come to pass. All that suffering. I no longer deliver propane. I still live in the area. To the best of my knowledge, the Korhonens are no longer resident on their property. But I went by once, a few months ago, and the place was still kept and clean, and the repairs were in a more advanced state than before. Just before I left, I swear to you I heard a banging. I'm going to jail because my boss eats people. What can I say? I'm the employee of a horrifying shape-shifting monster, but it's just the way it is and there's nothing we can do about it. And it was all working fine until Sharon was eaten. Sharon was too obvious and now the whole cover-up will be blown. You'll hear it in the news, so I might as well tell you now. Yeah, we knew Dwayne was a monster, like a real one. We think he might have come from space, but it doesn't really matter now. He would eat customers, that much is true. For the most part, only old elderly ones that came alone at night. But those weren't the ones we were worried about. It was the high-risk customers, once every 4 months or so, that we had to be vigilant about. It always happened around his own system of holidays. What were his holidays? Well, let me explain. June 7th, Stomp Day. Stomp Day was Stomp Day. You arrived at 8 a.m. sharp and were paid a lot of money to stay for the next 14 hours, instead of 8. At about a dozen different times throughout the day, you'd stomp the ground as hard as you could. The idea was to hide it. Like, sorry I was carrying this big load of plywood, and so I accidentally stomped as I almost lost balance. Or you could just stomp on a pallet jack to prevent swerving. You'd be surprised at how many discreet ways you can stomp right by a person's face and get away with it. The purpose of the stomping was to make customers flinch, which had something to do with building up a certain level of unease in the store. At the end of the day, the employee who could get the most flinches was awarded 3 months' pay, and an all-black Rubik's Cube. I'll get to that later. The hardest part was that you were competing with everyone else, and you were only allotted 7 tries at specific timestamps in the day, or time stomps as we called them. Everyone's time stomps were different. Mine were 8:21, 9 o'clock, 10:37, 11:40, 21:32, 2133, 2134. It was easiest just to set alarms on your phone. I always brought a spare battery for my dying iPhone 10. Anyway, if you could get someone really startled, Dwayne would show up and be very apologetic and tell the customer they can get a free DeWalt power drill from the back. He would take them into the loading bay, and into that room none of us were allowed in. You'll see it on the news. And then, well, the customer would be gone forever. But trust me, no one noticed. It's why we were able to get away with it for so long. Dwayne had some intuitive way of choosing single, fairly antisocial people, usually homeowners. So when they disappeared, it took a while for friends and family to catch on, and the police never had any leads. October 14th, St. Quelber's Cleaning Day. Before you go asking who St. Quelber is, we have no fucking clue. I should explain that Dwayne definitely does not speak English as his first language. I'd love to get some linguist or geneticist to tell me where he could possibly be from. Apparently, Quelber is some priest? An angel? Maybe Dwayne's mother? For whatever reason, Dwayne settled on the name St. Quelber and we just rolled with it. There wasn't any hard start to this holiday. You could book any kind of 6 or 8 hour shift, but if you were working on St. Quelber's, you'd better bring a bandana or N95 mask. Dwayne would basically fumigate the entire store with some chemical I can only describe as minty bleach. We would put up signs throughout the store that said we were having a cleaning day. Customers seemed to put up with it. Everyone just grabbed a courtesy COVID mask from the front and did their shopping as usual. But the closer you got to the back of the store, the stronger that minty bleach smell got. I should mention it wasn't like a hazy smoke or anything, it was completely translucent. More of a mist. If you were working on this day, you had to carry a rag in your back pocket and clean any stains you spotted on the floor or shelves. The substance in the air basically made any stain come out instantly. Yeah, I hated to think what it might have done to my eyes and skin, but I never had any adverse reactions, thank God. Inevitably, some customer with asthma or a cold or something would have a coughing fit and start spewing up phlegm. If the customer met Dwayne's criteria, he would graciously offer them the employee washroom in the back where they could go clean themselves up. And then, yup, you guessed it, he would eat them. But listen, we knew he ate people, I'm not pretending we didn't. We're definitely guilty of that. We just never directly killed anyone ourselves. We were at worst, accessories to murder, or coerced into compliance. In fact, I know it seems like we only enabled his behavior, which is true, but we were kind of forced to play along. It'll make more sense when I explain the next holiday. March 24th, annual graduation. If you want to work at Dwayne's Depot, you have to sign a year-long contract. It was very explicit. Dwayne always explained to new employees that he's sick of high turnover, so he would guarantee you a customer service job, fairly well paying, as long as you committed to a year. Obviously, the law states you can give your 2 weeks' notice at any job and leave, but Dwayne makes you sign an incredibly sophisticated contract that supposedly circumvents this law. As you'd imagine, this deters a lot of people, which is totally fine. Dwayne only seeks the committed. And so he filters out applicants until he gets someone who is desperate for a stable, decent-paying job with little experience. E.g., high school dropouts like me. Anyway, after a year of work, you are allowed to quit, but only on graduation day, which is generally 365 days after you started. On your graduation, Dwayne invites all the employees into the loading bay, and he sings you a song which is unlike anything you've ever heard, and is genuinely impossible to describe. Afterwards, he gives you a white rubber band with a certain number of tally marks, which I think corresponds to how many people you helped him eat that year. And then you can either move on with your life, keep working part-time at Dwayne's, or commit to another full year with a triple wage increase. We all told Sharon to wait. Just hold out until her graduation on March 27th. Once she got her first white rubber band, she could leave. I'll admit to that in court. Listen, I'm being super upfront about all of this. But she couldn't, she was a week away from her graduation when she snapped. Apparently she had snuck into Dwayne's room and saw something. Probably the eating process. On the day of her meltdown, I was at the opposite end of the depot when she grabbed a megaphone, which we sell in aisle 30 for about $80. I heard the buzzy click of the megaphone turning on, and then I heard Sharon's hysterical shouts. "We work for a monster. People have died here," etc., etc. I rushed over to shut her up, of course, as did 2 other employees, but she refused to be subdued. Very soon, Dwayne showed up, wiping his mouth and demanding to know what was going on. She tossed the megaphone at him and ran. And so, Dwayne chased her into the parking lot. The open-air customer parking lot in broad daylight, in front of like 20 people. Dwayne caught her by the hair and shrieked an unfathomable sound. Like a space lion roar or something. He pulled one of those black Rubik's cubes out from his pocket and basically sucked Sharon into it. Customers freaked out. Cars sped away. It was a fucking scene. We all stared with our jaws dropped, not knowing what to do. Wayne just stared back and said, "What are you looking at? Get back to work." The reason I think that Sharon was eaten was because the black cubes were how Dwayne stored his prey. And yes, before you ask, I do have 2 of them. They were awarded to me on some very successful stomp days. No, I have not opened them, I have no clue how they work. And yes, I will be giving them to the police. Honestly, it may not sound like my hands were tied, but my hands were tied. Where else was I supposed to work? I don't have a degree, and don't qualify for anything in finance, STEM, healthcare, or whatever. I applied to every other place in my neighborhood. I could only land a job at Dwayne's. Obviously I should go to jail, and I will, but I can't possibly deserve more than 18 months. Like 2 years tops with good behavior? Thanks to Dwayne, I've been able to afford the crazy high rent in the city. I'm just writing this all out here so you can see my side of the story. And now I have enough to pay for school too, before the news media spins everything out of control. Anyway, please DM me if you know a good lawyer. After this all blows over, I'm going to medical school with a goal to save at least 254 lives. 254 because that's how many tally marks I counted on my white rubber bands. Peace and love, y'all. Monique K. A few days ago, I got a letter in the mail. My name and address were scrawled on the envelope in large, shaky, capital letters. There was no return address. I brought it into my house with the rest of my mail and opened it. Inside, there was a small piece of paper about the size of a credit card that simply said, "Hello." It was written with those same shaky, capital letters that adorned the envelope. I turned the paper over and found nothing written on the back. The envelope was empty too. This random piece of paper with one word was all that was there, and I had no idea who sent it or why. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to being one of those handwritten church letters I'd sometimes get, and just left it on my counter with the rest of the junk mail I was too lazy to throw out. I then sat on my couch and watched TV for a while before going to bed, the letter completely forgotten at this point. After a decent night's sleep, I clumsily felt around my end table, trying to grab my phone and check the time. Instead, my hand brushed against a piece of paper. I didn't remember having any papers there, so out of curiosity I grabbed it, figuring it'd be a random receipt or something. It was not a receipt. It was a credit card-sized piece of paper with the word "hello" written on it in shaky, capital letters. I was confused. I could have sworn I left that on the counter last night. Clutching the paper, I went to my pile of junk mail. I found the envelope there, but not the paper. All right, so this is the same piece of paper, but I still had no idea how it got into my room. As I was trying to figure that out, my cat, Craig, rubbed up against my leg and meowed. I took a quick glance at his food bowl, and saw that, as I expected, the bottom was visible. Craig is never this affectionate unless he was hungry. "All right, I'll feed you," I said, petting Craig's head. As I poured some food in Craig's bowl, I figured that maybe Craig knocked the paper down and the AC or something blew it into my room. At the moment, that made the most sense, so I went with that explanation. As Craig chowed down, I turned the piece of paper over in my hand. It was just a small piece of paper with one word on it. What was the point of it? And who sent it? After considering these questions for a moment, I crumpled up the piece of paper and threw it out. Honestly, I didn't care that much, and I had better things to do with my time than unravel this mystery. As if on cue, my phone reminded me of one of those better things, a date I had tonight with my boyfriend, George. We hadn't been going out for too long, but I really liked him and was excited to see him again. We were going to have dinner together at an upscale restaurant tonight, and I still needed to get everything ready. I got my car washed and cleaned inside and out, picked up some flowers, and then got myself ready. I met George at the restaurant. I gave him the flowers, which made him blush, and then we had a very nice, if expensive, dinner. After dinner, we got into my car and started making out. Soft, quick kisses soon turned long, passionate, and intense. George started pushing me against the driver's side door while kissing me. As he was adjusting himself, he accidentally put his hand into one of my car's cup holders. I heard a slight crinkling of paper. What the hell? I know I cleaned out my car, and I know for a fact there were no random wrappers, receipts, or napkins in this car. George seemed to sense my confusion and stopped. "Everything okay?" he asked between heavy breaths. "Yeah," I said. "I just don't know how there's a piece of paper in here. I swear, I cleaned this out before we met up tonight." George chuckled. "It's fine, babe," he said, picking it up. "You probably just missed something. It happened. It's probably just some receipt." George's voice trailed off as he read it. "What is it?" I asked. "You tell me," he answered, giving me the paper. Written on the small, credit card-sized paper was a phone number with the name Dylan written in handwriting I was all too familiar with. I stared at it blankly. Did this hello guy break into my car just to put this here? There was no sign of a break-in. Did George do this? Is this some joke? What the hell was going on? "So," he said, his arms crossed. "Who's Dylan?" I have no idea," I stammered. "Then how come you have his number?" George looked genuinely upset. "I don't think he was behind this." "Okay," I said, trying to figure out how to explain this. "So, George gave me a look that said, "Come on, get to it already." "All right, so I got this letter in the mail from someone I do not know, and it had a piece of paper that only said hello, and then the paper somehow got into my room, and then I thought Craig moved it there somehow and threw it out, and now the person behind that piece of paper somehow put this one in my car because it has the same writing style," I said in a rush. George took a second to take it all in. "That's certainly an explanation," he said. "It's the truth, I swear," I said. "All right. You believe me?" George shrugged. "It's an insane explanation, but I'm willing to go with it for now." I breathed a sigh of relief. "Thank you," I said. We both sat silently for a moment before I asked, "So, want to pick up where we left off?" George shook his head. "Not really in the mood anymore, sorry. I should probably get home, actually." George gave me a quick peck goodbye, and then went back to his car. Meanwhile, I sat in my car staring at the piece of paper. I racked my brains, trying to figure out if I knew anyone named Dylan. I think I had a friend in elementary school named Dylan. Or was it Declan? Considering he used to put crayons up his nose, I doubt he was clever enough to pull off something like this. I really didn't want to look into this further. I wanted to move on with my life and focus on other things. But this, whatever this is, seems to want my attention. And they did give me a way to contact them. I dialed the number from the paper into my phone. It rang a couple of times, and then someone picked up. "Hello?" I said. "Hello." The voice at the other end sounded artificial, like one of those text-to-speech programs. It stressed each syllable like they were separate words. "Who is this?" I asked. "Hello," the voice repeated. "How do you know me?" "Hello." And with that, the call dropped. I tried calling again but got a "this number is no longer in service" message. Annoyed, I decided to Google the number and the name Dylan. It led me to someone named Dylan Rogers. A little more Googling led me to discover that Dylan was recently found dead in his home. No one knows who did it and the case is still ongoing. The only lead cops have is that Dylan was found holding a credit card-sized piece of paper in his hand, but it was too covered in blood to make out anything on it. This information rattled around in my head as I drove home. I had no idea what to do with it. Do I call the cops? Hello, 911? Yes, I keep getting pieces of paper that say hello on them except for one that had a name and a phone number that belonged to a dead guy. Why, no, I haven't had anything to drink. Why do you ask? Yeah, that'd go great. A part of me wanted to call George and tell him about this, but I decided against it. It'd just look like me trying to add on to an already ridiculous excuse. I wasn't sure who to tell about this. My friends were all busy and my family disowned me after I came out. I was basically on my own. I decided I'd investigate this more when I got home, maybe even submit my situation as a tip in the Dylan Rogers case. I just knew I had to do something. After a very stressful drive, I finally got home. As soon as I walked inside, I noticed something felt off. I turned on the lights. Hello? I called out. Anyone there? Nothing. Dead quiet. I slowly made my way from my living room into my kitchen. I could see Craig's silhouette lying on the floor of the kitchen, probably sleeping. As I stepped into the kitchen, my foot slipped on something. I grabbed a counter for balance. What the hell did I slip on? I know my floors were clean when I left. I turned on the kitchen lights and discovered two things. First, Craig wasn't sleeping. He was dead. His throat had been brutally sliced open. His eyes were still open, stuck in abject terror. Second, I know what I slipped in. Craig's blood. The blood itself wasn't splattered randomly on the floor. No, it was used to write out a message on the floor. It was a simple message, only being one word, written in large, shaky, capital letters. Hello.